It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of self-reliance. An Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
This is our country.
Good evening and welcome again to An Economy of One. I am your host, Gary Rathbun. I'm going to get right into our next interview. He's waiting for us on hold. Joining me now is John Berlau. He's a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's a contributor at Forbes.com, but you can find him everywhere. He's in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, New York Times, Daily Caller, Washington Examiner, everywhere. He's brought his knowledge to Congress, testifying before the House Committee on Financial Services and the House Committee on Energy and Commerce on the impact of financial regulation. John, welcome to An Economy of One.
Thank you. Thank you for the very kind introduction.
I appreciate you joining me. We met out to CPAC very briefly. Everything was kind of crazy around my booth for a little bit there, and we didn't get a chance to talk very much. And I told my producer, I said, get his card, because this article that you wrote is very near and dear to my heart, and since we've read a lot of your other stuff. But first and foremost, tell us a little bit, give us some background on the Department of Labor's fiduciary rule. We hear a lot about it, but nobody really pays too much attention other than those of us that it affects.
Well, and it could affect quite a few people, from insurance agents to brokers, to even people who, like yourself, talk about financial issues and give financial tips over the radio. I don't know.
Right.
Do you take callers?
I do, but just to give you a little background on me, I'm an RIA, so yeah. I operate under a fiduciary rule anyway. I understand the language is a little bit different than the Department of Labor, but we take callers, but I don't give any advice over the air. And all my callers know that. They ask me what to do, and I won't tell them because I don't know who they are. So I take my fiduciary position very, very seriously. But some people do give advice over the radio. They will tell people whether to buy a stock or not buy a stock or mutual fund or whatever.
This rule is so broad, and ultimately who all is affected is, of course, investors, savers who are going to see their costs their costs raised, and advice harder to get, and the choices in the 401ks and IRAs limited. But that's who it's ultimately going to affect, and it's the Department of Labor stepping in front of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has the charge of regulating both brokers and investment advisors, and just venturing in an area that it doesn't have the expertise in, and just is really going to be have, unless Congress stops it or the courts do, just some devastating impacts.
Is the SEC commenting on this? I mean, it's moving into their jurisdiction. They got anything to say about this?
Yes, I don't think they were too happy about it. They were working on their own fiduciary standard in general, but this one is so. This one is just so broad that it's sort of it ignores what the common law definition of fiduciary is, and gives just basically says that you're a fiduciary unless you meet these certain exemptions, and even appraisers, the IRA custodians who clearly don't offer advice to investors. I mean, some of them serve self-directed IRAs who would be labeled as fiduciaries and face liability if the Department of Labor doesn't consider the investment choices in the best interest. That's what they say. They mandate that they must ask in the best interest, but how does the government know what one-size-fits-all best interest is?
Well, and, I've been a fee-based RIA for a long time, and I do want to say that it seems like the Department of Labor and some of the press around it are assuming that just because someone takes a commission, their advice is tainted. And I know that's not the case in many situations, But it seems to me like the fiduciary rule, the Department of Labor, probably has good intentions, but the way it's written, the comments you've made on it and breaking down the legislation, you're absolutely right. It's so broad that anybody can get in trouble doing this. It leaves it up to the subjectivity of the Department of Labor.
Yes, I mean some RIAs and certified financial planners, not all, and not yourself, but I applaud you, have been sort of seeing this as a way to block competition, like taxi cabs and do with Uber, rather than touting their own credentials and saying why you should choose me over a broker or another RIA. But I think they're going to get surprised with some of the paperwork there because the best interest standard is just so open-ended, and it gets to not just it gets to the quality or the choice in investments, where the Department of Labor is recommending things like index funds, which are appropriate for a lot of people, but not for everyone, not for people with capital conservation, and people should be able to make that choice. So it's dictating a one-size-fits-all standard. In the Department of Labor, the one of the most amazing parts about this is they say disclosure alone is proven ineffective, and quote, their own quote, recent research suggests that even if disclosure could be made simple and clear, it would be even effective or even harmful. People can't prudently manage their retirement accounts. So they admit that it's not something that beneficial that could approve disclosure, that they're actually restricting choices.
Yeah, I mean, you remember, I'm sure, the Pension Protection Act of '06. And that's taken several years to implement all that, and it was designed to give a transparency to all the fees and all the costs of pension plans, 401ks, IRAs, that kind of stuff. And for them to come out and say, well, that's not enough, and people ought to buy nonprofit index funds, and it's just seems to me like it's just another grab of sticking their nose in something that nobody is really complaining about. I mean, they're creating a solution to a problem that doesn't necessarily exist. I mean, I understand their motivation, but in reading your research on this, I just don't see how it's going to help the smaller investor, the 401k investor, the middle class, as they classify them. You've done some research now. Did they do something similar to this in the UK?
Yes, they banned third-party commissions, and this rule effectively bans them from what brokers like Edward Jones are saying, that the liability they face would make it next to impossible to do the third-party commission model, so moving everybody to a fee-based model. And in Great Britain now, when they directly ban commissions, you're finding that people with less than £150,000, $240,000 are just, there's a real guidance gap where they can't find people to service their accounts, advisors or brokers. So, and people are, including Democrats, 96 Democrats wrote to the Labor Department, 96 Democrats in the House, saying that that make sure similar things don't happen here.
Now, I mean, that being said, I mean, I just got done talking in another segment about what we're calling the fourth branch of government, and that is these different agencies writing their own rules, essentially writing laws without Congress approving them. Does Congress have to approve any of this? Can they override it, veto it? Is Department of Labor on their own and can do whatever they want?
Well, Congress certainly can. Block. They can block it. They can pass a resolution of disapproval against it. They do have 60 legislative days, but of course that's subject to President Obama's veto. They can also defund it, but that's difficult in a funding bill. Right. But the Department of Labor is exercising authority that Congress never granted to them. The Employer Retirement Income Security Act when it was very narrowly focused over defined benefit plans, and it certainly didn't give authority to define fiduciary in a way different from the way the SEC is defining it, in the way common law cases where you're a you're basically a trustee in the plan or put in a position of trust. I mean, here you have people that give it. Basically, it's sort of who isn't a fiduciary as far as the exemptions, and brokers, insurance agents. Even in some cases, radio hosts, some people who lead a seminar, if they take individual questions, could be labeled a fiduciary. So they don't have the authority to do this. That's the reason the court might strike it down. But Congress still needs to do its fiduciary duty and try their best to stop this.
We're speaking with John Berlau, Senior Fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and a contributor at Forbes.com. John, I got a couple other questions in a little bit different direction. I got to take a break. Can you hang on through the break for a couple minutes?
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
I appreciate it. I'm Gary Rathbun. This is an Economy of One.
This is an Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
I'm talking to John Berlau. He's a Senior Fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. John, you recently wrote some other stuff about one of my favorite all-time burrs in my side, and that's the Dodd-Frank legislation, and, of course, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and what that's doing to banking industry, what it's doing to small business in this country. How's your view of what Dodd-Frank is doing to us here?
It's punishing Main Street, community banks, and credit unions. We're co-plaintiffs with the small banks in the challenge to Dodd-Frank that had zero foreclosures for the past 2 decades. The small bank in West Texas, the State National Bank, yet had to quit making mortgages just because it was defined and it had a slight interest rate adjustment that the CFPB called a balloon payment. So we're seeing the CFPB, like the Department of Labor, stretching its authority. And when Congress says it can't regulate auto dealers, it says, okay, we'll regulate the lenders who go to auto dealers. I mean, whether or not it should have jurisdiction, that should be up to Congress. And unlike even the Department of Labor, it gets its appropriations from money from the Fed, so it doesn't have even that appropriations accountability. And that's some of the things we're challenging in our court case.
Yeah, I was reading an article, and you mentioned him too, Ian Murray, that they get their money from the Fed, so you can't cut off their financing. Am I right in what I read? The head guy, they can't even be fired. I mean, they have no bottom line. The president can't fire him. Congress can't fire him unless he does something really, really bad that you can catch him doing.
Malfeasance. I mean, that you have to have actual malfeasance. I mean, he's basically like a cabinet officer with no accountability. Every other federal agency, you either have a bipartisan board, with fixed terms, although there usually is removal for cause even there,
right.
Like the SEC, the Federal Trade Commission, others. Or you have, like the Department of Labor, where the president does appoint one person to head the agency, but the next president, whoever he or she may be, can remove that person and appoint his own cabinet. Here you have just one guy, Richard Cordray, heading this agency or this bureau, and the next president, whoever he or she may be, can't remove him until the 5-year term is up.
Yeah, it was just interesting because I read something about some testimony before Congress or congressman or senator, somebody asked him about the $215 million he spent refurbishing their offices, and his answer to Congress was, well, what's it to you? I mean, that is arrogance squared right there.
Right, and they're also building this huge database that basically rivals the NSA with all our mortgage and credit card information. they say to scrub the data for names, but even things like addresses could, give a hacker info and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. What's that doing to small businesses in this country? Small businesses, I've always felt, are the lifeblood of America. They're the lifeblood of job creation. They're the lifeblood of GDP and creating products in the world. What's Dodd-Frank and all this stuff doing to our small businesses?
Well, small businesses borrow a lot of their money from community banks, and if you see the number of community banks shrinking or merging due in large part to Dodd-Frank rules, then there is less availability for small business loans. I mean, the good news is you have these marketplace online lenders making small business loans. But even now the SEC is saying, even though they're a consumer agency, not a small business agency, they're saying that they're trying to exercise jurisdiction over that too. So it never ends.
It's just incredible to me because I've said for a while, I was involved in a de novo bank several years ago, and they're just getting regulated right out of business. I got the impression that the federal government, or whoever the powers are, kind of want to have 5-10 banks in this country, and that's it. I mean, they haven't issued any charters in a long time.
There's only been one de novo bank in the past 5 years, in the 5 years since Dodd-Frank's been enacted. The Bird and Hand Bank in the Amish community of Bird and Hand, Pennsylvania. That's it. It's just crazy. I mean, imagine if they said, that there could be no new ways of. I mean, and this ties into the too big to fail, because if you could say, you'd never have Amazon or something, then Borders could have been too big to fail. Right. So it's creating the problem that that these big banks have a monopoly if you literally don't approve a challenger to them.
Right. I found it interesting. I don't know if you saw the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, but front page of the Wall Street Journal, MetLife, I think it was celebrating that they got the courts to classify them as not too big to fail.
Oh, that actually, yes, I've been following that case closely. In fact, our case originally challenged the Financial Stability Oversight Council, where just basically some firms like AIG embrace being too big to fail, but MetLife said, well, we'd rather not deal with the red tape there, and we're worried that bank capital standards that would be opposed were inappropriate for their insurance policies, and certainly MetLife, a well-run company, had nothing to do with the crisis, and they were saying the same things, the lack of accountability for the Financial Stability Oversight Council, with there I don't even think you have some of the appointees approved by Congress, and policy in secret, things like that, and a judge just granted their motion and said enough, and it said the case is under seal, but one of the things MetLife argued is just very arbitrary criteria. The government basically said you're going to be too big to fail because we tell you you're too big to fail, and they told the judge the court shouldn't have anything to say about it, and she disagreed. Good for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've been speaking with John Berlau. He's a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Writes all over, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, everywhere. We're going to put all your information up on our website and Facebook. John, I'm really glad we finally was able to hook up, and I hope that you'll allow us to give you a call again, use you as a resource in this area.
I would be glad to, Gary. CEI.org is our website.
CEI.org. We'll put that up. And John, once again, thanks for all your time, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. I'm Gary Rathbun. This is an Economy of One.